Welcome to this tutorial on using Motion 5 to recreate a high-quality network sports graphic. If you head over to Troika's website, you can see their NBC Sports brand update rundown. They kind of go through all of the thought that went into their graphics package that NBC is using on just about every sports event that you see on television right now. And some of my favorite elements in the graphic are the particles that they use and the way that they build their boxes. So we've recreated using Motion 5 some of these box-like structures that they probably did in a 3D rendering program, and we're going to do them in 2D. So if you take a look here, here is the recreation of what you see across this graphic. So at the beginning of the graphic, there's a bit of a reveal using a mask and some flaring effects. And then across the graphic, there's a shine that kind of travels from left to right, and these really unique glowing particles that kind of float in the corners of the box. And the bottom of the box is pretty interesting as well. It's got a cylindrical kind of shape. So let's take a look at some of the elements and how this was built. If I switch over to show the points for each of these elements, so I'll start at the bottom of the box and showing edit points. This is the top of the box here. So if you take a look here, this is a trapezoid. I can zoom in and show the corner of where I'm selecting to get a little bit more detail. So here is the top of that box there. It's a trapezoid with a gradient. If we take a look at the gradient over here, you can see that the outside edges of the gradient are kind of lower in opacity, and the center of the gradient is high in opacity, so you can't see through it. And then the color-wise, it's got a lighter gray in the center, and at the edges it's got a darker gray to all the way over close to black. So using gradients and opacity and drawing these simple shapes, you can do a rectangle and edit the points, or you can draw using Bezier and different types of vector based kind of artwork where you're making points and then controlling what's going on within the points using this type of gradient. We're going to see how it's built as we go along. So here's the bottom, and this has been flopped, I believe. So it kind of remembers the points, but then it flips it and kind of mirrors it so that you don't have to draw the gradient a second time. Here we're going to see the right side of the graphic, and it's got two different types of gradients that kind of accentuate and highlight. And this would be, again, the left side, but it's been flopped, so it's kind of similar to the right side, just using this flop behavior. It allows you to kind of, actually it's a flop filter. Using the flop filter, it allows you to mirror it and not have to do the work a second time. And then continuing up in our different vectors here. Here, this group is the bottom of the cylinder, so it's kind of the 3D element that we're mimicking in 2D. And this took a majority of the time to build this kind of shine graphic. The box itself was quite simple, but the bottom cylinder takes a lot more time. And there's a couple of really good tutorials out there that you can find to help you with building a cylinder. We'll take a look at this here. If we zoom in to get a little bit tighter onto this, you see that it's kind of this multiple point vector that has, if we go over to the shape, it's got some opacity things going on where it fades from top to bottom. So the top of this, if we solo it, and solo is Shift S, no, Option S, go back to edit points, and Control S, there it is. So if we solo that and hide, so Control S solos and hide Shift question mark, Command question mark, there we go. Command question mark is hiding the overlays. You're seeing this kind of shape that fades out as it goes to the bottom of the screen there. We're going to Control Shift S, and that should bring back our layers. Oh, there they go. So that's this lower graphic, and we're gonna Command question mark again to bring back our points, I'm sorry, our overlays. And if we step up, what are we looking at here? I gotta zoom out. Okay, so this, it's just kind of a little notch element that is sitting in the corner of the right side of the screen. Again, that's going to be kind of this point-like gradient that has some opacity and grayscale coloring as we go up. Let's see what we got here. Okay, this is now the group that gives the end cap. I'll zoom in on that to get a better image. And this was probably the most complex part to get the shines correct, and there's a great tutorial that shows you exactly how to do it that I'll list and link out to. If you take a look at this gradient, there is some color things going on where the opacity is somewhat see-through at 75%, and then there are some handles here that start this shine, and this is the bottommost layer, so it's probably hardest to see. We start at the top, it picks out some of the highlights a little bit better. So here, this is a gradient that kind of starts off white and fades off as it comes to the top. So here's white fading off, and it is at a lower opacity, kind of see-through and blends. So there's a blend. Its properties, does it blend? No, the blend mode is set to normal. And then if we take a look at some of the other different elements to this, again, these are just touches that give you the spectral highlights of this shape. It's a 2D shape, but you can make it look 3D with different vector elements that are when you use the gradients here. So here, this is at a low opacity, and kind of adds this top shine element. As we travel down the layers, here is the bottom shine. Okay, so this is just a straight white color with no gradient. Here we're seeing another straight white color with no gradient. It is being feathered a little bit, so that gives you kind of the softness around the edges. And these two are kind of the combination of the bottom, where you have a little bit of opacity, see-through, and it's darker in color. And here again, a little bit of opacity, see-through, and this kind of gives it the shine in the middle. So if we were to solo these, let's Control S. This is kind of one of the background pieces, and Control Shift S to go back. Let's unsolo. Takes some time because there's so many layers. You can kind of see what was going on in those layers there. Okay, and then this group was copied and flopped to make the other side end cap. And as you travel up, we start with that kind of goes through the outer box. So you have the box with the trapezoids that kind of make the rectangular structure, and then below the box there's that bottom cylinder, and there's an image mask on this to constrain some of the graphics from spilling out of it. So we'll talk about image masks once we get it more up into the top section where the particles are kind of contained within the box. So let's take a look at this next section up. Zoom out all the way. Shift Z is a global zoom. Select one of the shapes, and now take a look at some of the elements within the boxes. So this is a very see-through at 12% opacity white shape that kind of adds a little bit of a haze over top. So if this was to be soloed, Control S, there's the haze, and it's probably got some blend mode things going on. No, set to normal. I guess because it is so see-through, so the opacity was set down at 12%, it makes it barely visible within the graphic. So we're unsoloing right now, it takes a little time. So it kind of adds just a little bit of a style over top of this section here. And this, let's solo this one. And this is going to be hard to see because it's black. If we bring up the background, Here you can see that this is just a black shape that has kind of a little bit of see-through quality, so it's feathered out at the edges, and it is almost solid. Let's see if there's any. No blend mode on this. Again, waiting on the solo. Okay, and then traveling up. Okay, this is where kind of the pop of the graphic comes from. It's all radial gradient. So you can draw a square. So this is just drawing a square object, changing the fill mode to gradient, and then using interesting kind of vibrant colors here. We have almost a neon green and then a little bit of a deeper green that starts off with almost 100% opacity, 85%, and then it kind of gradually tapers off to nothing. So the edges kind of fall off to nothing. These types of radial gradients are very useful graphic elements, and you see them a lot in popular graphic design. And I'm not sure if this has. It's still set to normal, so there isn't a whole lot of blend mode things going on. A lot of this is done just strictly with setting the opacity of each of the layers so that they interact. Some might have some blend modes. We'll kind of examine those as we go through. So that's kind of this whole section here. There's that white highlight, there's the darker background, and then set over top of those is the that green kind of radial gradient. And let's take a look at the next section. So if we go back to edit points mode, you'll see some of the outer. Let's again maybe change to alpha, and we'll solo that. So here this is kind of a white gradient that starts at 12% and ends up at 3%, so it's a very light white kind of highlight. And take it out of solo and take a look at the next. So this is slightly smaller. We're still waiting for the solo. There we go. And now the inside element. We'll solo that and take a look. So there's that black element again. This is just straight up black, no color, or no gradient, just a straight up black color, and then slightly lower in opacity. So these two kind of interact with each other. There's the white beneath this that's very light. I wonder if we can solo this one too. So we can get kind of the effect that's going on here. The white is outside of this black box, and the black box is somewhat see-through. The white outside this box is very see-through with a very low opacity. So as these two solo, maybe even take it back down to the black color, and command question mark, so you can see the outside edge of this. And here you can see this is a pretty dynamic element here. By putting those two together, We have this black box in the center that kind of masks the white outside edge that gives you that kind of spectral highlight. And this white box, it seems to be like there's more than meets the eye. We have the gradient. It's a linear gradient. Just starting at the top of the box, it's 100% white at 12% opacity, and then as it travels, it's going down to 3% opacity. So it's it's barely there, but it does add a pretty interesting kind of graphic element. And then we will go back to unsoloing. So let's Control-Shift-S. Okay, so that's that white spectral highlight that goes around. It's a black box in the middle and a white highlight on the edge. And then inside of that, there's probably another box, it looks like. If we Command $show, yeah, you can see this inner box. And let's try to solo that. This has a slight color to it, so it's got a little bit of the green from this radial graphic here. It's that deep green heading off into black, and it's at a lower opacity, so that deep green is kind of it's lower opacity, but let me rephrase that. It's a higher opacity, 85%, so it kind of stands out. It's not so see-through, but you still can see through to the beneath elements. And it heads over to 0%. So at the edges, it's going to kind of fade. And then this is another, let's go back, Control-Shift-S. So we're taking that out of solo mode. And this Group 7 copy, I'm not quite sure if this is necessary. Let's solo this. Anything even in this. So I guess when this was copied, it copied over Group 7, and those elements were probably deleted earlier on. So Control-Shift-S. Group 7 was not discussed in that left box section that we just talked about, but it's this motion graphics market logo in two different scales. So you take it once and kind of fit it within the box and use the box as a mask so that it cuts off the edges, and it looks like some of the graphic elements sit above it to kind of obscure it. And then in the background, it's being scaled much larger. So that's another brilliant Troika thing that goes on often. You kind of have this doubling effect in the background. Let's see if we can find one. We have to watch. You definitely see it in their lower thirds and some of their full screen graphics. So here's full screen. These are just outstanding. Great work. Okay, well here you would see it in the lower third, so you can see the 10 and it kind of jumps out behind it. Very lower opacity, kind of blending in and at a larger scale and then getting masked off around the edges. So here you can see that, you know, this graphic was set to a larger scale. If we go to the properties, you can see that the opacity has been turned down, and the blend mode was set to linear burn, so it's kind of like back there in the background and kind of interacting with the green. And the mask, if we take a look at the mask, was set to that outside green layer, the gradient. So the gradient kind of masks it off and cuts off the outer edges of what's been scaled up. Okay, so I think we left off here. We'll bring back our overlays and show our points. There we go. Let's go over to where the flare kind of disappears so we can see what's going on. So it was the black, or the white outer box, the black inner box, and the greenish inner box. And then this was unnecessary, so we can just delete that layer. And here is just the text layer. I used Helvetica. NBC has a font that they use in all their graphics. I'm not sure what that font is, and I think I did some research on it, and it was a paid font, so I'll be sure to list that at the bottom of the tutorial. If we take a look at some of the right box, it's going to be similar to what we just saw in that box. So a lot of these elements have just been copied over, and you can edit the points and reset the points. You can do that with this edit points tool, or if you go into the geometry and look at the control points, these can be typed directly, so you can kind of use the XY to get very precise results and set your boxes, because a lot of times if you jump in and look at this graphic, just arranging boxes next to each other with some very small negative space gives you interesting graphic elements. So this is kind of revealing what's happening in between these two outer boxes. And you know, by using those control points, you can get, you know, really precise results to give you really accurate boxes. So this is white outer box, black inner box, and then the greenish hue inner box again, and then with the text layer above that. This is grayed out because it's being used as a mask for the particles. So the particles exist kind of all over the place, and then the mask just contains them within that box. So if we continue on up, this is just the highlight that sits above this whole graphic. So let me get a global zoom. You can see this kind of highlight in the background here. It's just a rectangle with completely white, and it starts off with 1% opacity and goes up to 4% opacity. And you can kind of set the start and end points of that gradient to give you that. And if we just solo it, it's kind of this very light rectangular gradient that adds a kind of spectral highlight again. And then we can continue up, and this might start getting into the emitter. Yes, so if you take a look, the emitter is just simple circles, and you can get a little bit more complex than just circles, but we made them very small to give you these little kind of globe-like points of light, and added a glow. So let's take a look at the filter. So here's the glow, if you wanted to use this type of glow. And then again, here is that mask that we were talking about, where it's retaining the particle system within the box. And we'll take a look at the emitter itself. So we're using a line emitter, and there's actually a few of them. So we have two layers above that kind of act as, oh, this is that traveling layer that kind of shines across. It brings like a glowing shine across. So that's kind of a simple element with a couple different filters on top. So we're using this dazzle filter and a fade in, fade out behavior at the beginning and end, and a motion path. So it travels from left to right in time from here to here. This second element doesn't move. So that's kind of these glowing things. Are we in the left side? Yes, so we're in sparkles left. So this object does not move, it just kind of stays here. And if we solo it and get rid of our overlay, we can see that this is kind of a mintier green that goes off to black, and it is at 100% opacity, because so it kind of like obscures what's going on behind it. That seems like it could be dropped down a little bit, but the shape is this gradient, and I believe that there's some feathering going on to give it its shape. Yeah, so we have negative 100 feathering and negative 100 fall off. That gives it that kind of outer shape. And if we look again back at the style, or the properties, I'm sorry, here we go. Here in the properties, it is dropped down to 42% opacity, and the blend mode is set to add, so it's kind of accentuating what's going on into the background. So here you can kind of see that glow there. And then back down into the particles, we started talking about, there's two sets. The top set of particles have a line emitter. So if we go into the emitter, with these start points and end points, and here's the emission angle and range, and it starts off with 0 birth rate, so they're not being born. You're not adding new particles across time. It just has this amount of particles throughout the entire life of this whole sequence, and they're kind of just spreading out. So what you do is you create that line emitter, and then you drag it forward in the composition many frames. So like the end point of this sequence, I'm not sure if it's in here. Maybe it's in properties. If we look at timing, yes, the endpoint is back 150 frames, and it lasts the whole duration of the sequence, 751. This sequence is only set to 300 frames, so it's 10 seconds long, 30 frames per second. So by dragging the endpoint of the emitter back, it's kind of letting the emitter do its thing and letting the particles kind of spread out from each other, so that at the beginning of this sequence, it's already kind of spread out, and you can use a masking tool to kind of reveal the emitter to the audience. So if we go into the emitter here, you can see that it's a pretty slow thing that's going on. The speed is set to this 0.5 here, and it has a little bit of randomness going on, and it's got a big initial number, and they stay on the screen for the entire duration of this graphic. And we do have a little color mode over time, so I guess it's starting at this higher opacity and then going to a lower opacity, so 40 and starting at 100, so they kind of get a little bit softer as it goes later in time. And then properties wise, what kind of blending? It's an additive blend mode, and we've lowered its opacity there. So that's kind of the particles in the background. I think it's close to what you see in the original graphic, but I don't think I've officially nailed it. Their particles are outstanding, and really is the eye-catching part of the graphic, in my opinion. So there's two sets of particles in this left side. I'll bring back our overlay so we can see what we're looking at. Here's emitter 1, or emitter 2 and emitter 1. And once you get a good emitter, you can kind of copy it and then just tweak it a little bit. So this one was the first one we were looking at, and then I probably copied that over and set the opacity a little bit lower, it looks like. And then this one, again, there's no birth rate. There's a little bit less particles, the initial number that they stay on for the duration. This one's a little bit faster, so it gets very slow particle, and then this one has a little bit faster and a little bit of a different random speed generation. And we're opacity at 100, and again it goes down to kind of fading out, and that it's probably got the same blend mode set up, so additive blend mode, and it's a little bit lower in opacity than the last one. So that's kind of the emitters that are going on in the corners here. And I think that kind of wraps it up, aside from maybe talking about the just the one that moves. No, I think we already talked about that. That's the circle at the top. Here's the one that moves. And just cycling through, this was the left, and then here's the right. So this is kind of this whole system here. We have one and two emitters. That glowing green-like minty circle that glows and adds to anything behind it. And that about wraps it up for the inside of the graphics. And above all of that, there is, so that's the lower third, and above all that we can take a look at the beginning of kind of how this is revealed. If we show points, this is a shape that's been generated with this fill color, and you can kind of see some of the flaring effects that were built. It's a green circle that has been shaped, and we'll go into the geometry. The control points were keyframed, so that's why it's kind of doing this. Starts off as a larger ellipse and then kind of squishes down. And if you look at the geometry here, there's some feathering that goes on, sorry, in the style. So the feathering and fall off is also being keyframed. So that's how it kind of gets revealed and fades out. And there's quite a bit of effect on here. So if we go into the filters, this was copied over from the first circle. So there's actually 3 different circles that are doing stuff here and are being keyframed and have some effects on it. So once one was created, then they were copied, and then different keyframing was done and different effects. So this was flip-flopped. There's an echo effect where it kind of makes a stuttering occur, the multiple iterations of the same kind of flash, and this only happens across the first second of what's going on, so up to 30, 40 frames. So it's happening very quickly, and then the dazzle is also applied there, and a bit of a move. So it starts from one location and goes to another location. And I think a lot of that was more so done with the keyframing than it was with the move. It doesn't look like the move is actually doing much. Look at the move behavior. This one. So you set the position, and it's setting a speed to decelerate. And if we look at the circle that we're looking at here, kind of starts off with this long tail. And then as you frame across, you can kind of see what's going on with the graphic. Let's take a look at properties. It's an additive blend mode, and the opacity is lowered. So that's this whole group. It's kind of all the little flashes that happen at the beginning, and this could also be copied to the end, and another mask could be drawn up to kind of mask it out, so that there's an in animation and an out animation. As of right now, there's only in animation, and it stays on the screen for the duration. I wanted to show the mask that kind of reveals what's going on. So lower third, and let's see if we can find the mask. It might be this. Yes, this is the. So if we look at the image mask, circle 2, so it's probably a circle that has a gradient. So we can show it. Yes. So this is kind of how the mask is working to reveal what's happening here. Anywhere where it is 100% white is going to be shown to the audience, and then as it fades out, that's what's not seen yet by the audience. So this is a circle, so you use the circle tool, and you're going to set the cut. It doesn't even have a gradient built, it's just a color, and then it feathers off and falls off very slowly, and then it moves. So if you move this, if I'm going to go No, it's actually scaling was the effect. So across each of these frames, as that circle scales up and eventually gets to 100% white, that's the masking that's going on. So if you look at, let's see what's being keyframed here. Probably in properties, yeah, position and scale changes. So you'll see the scale really jumping in order to do the revealing of the graphic in the background. And if we look at the mask, so I'll turn this back off, you can set up the mask options and set it to alpha. So once the alpha of the white, I believe luminance would do the same thing. It looks like luminance reveals more faster. Go back to alpha. No, it's doing pretty much the same thing. So you're pulling the alpha from this circle layer that's hidden. So alpha is how much you can see through. It's basically opacity. So it's like you know, if there's pixels there, then they're at 100%, and it can be seen. If there's pixels not there, then they're at 0%, and then it can't be seen. So if you go back into the mask, if you pull from the alpha channel and set this to add, subtract will do the opposite. So it's getting rid of what's going on in the background here. Sometimes you just gotta play, and a happy mistake. Looks like intersect's also working. I'll leave it to add. And that does the revealing of all the box and graphic design that's going on in the background. So a couple interesting techniques I picked up by trying to recreate this graphic using Motion 5. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave comments.